This is 7th grade lesson 3.4. Our objective today is students will write and solve proportions. The standard covered in this lesson is 7RP2A. The page numbers out of the hardcover book are 116 through 121, and out of the practice journal, pages 67 through 70. Today we're going to be working with writing proportions. And to start out with, we'll go ahead and work with a table. We're not always going to use a table, but that's kind of what we'll begin with. You can either use the columns of our table that we have there to write proportions, or you can set it up using the rows. So here, just looking at our table and understanding what it has, it says last month we purchased 2 ringtones and our total cost was $6. And then this month we bought 3 ringtones, and how much money is that going to cost us? So I'm starting out with a really easy proportion just to help you understand and make it easy for you to understand how we actually go through and configure this off of a more complex proportion. So if I were to use the columns, so columns would be your top and bottom. So like here, I went ahead and set up in column format. So you'll notice that that matches this fraction. I've got 2 ringtones with $6. And then I went ahead and just set up my other column as my second fraction of 3 ringtones over X dollars. Okay, so that's setting it up in proportions. If I were to go through and want to solve this, I know some of you could mentally do this because you've already figured it out. But like I said, I chose to do this so that it was something easy that you could kind of check yourself on. In using a proportion, we're going to have to start using those cross products. So if we do a cross product, we're going to go ahead and take 6 times 3, and then that's where we have 2 numbers diagonal. And then we're going to divide by the third number, or cross multiply, divide. Up in your upper levels, they call it cross multiply and solve, because when we get into our next lesson, we're going to actually be solving some of these that are involving algebra. So here, if I were to set this up, I would cross multiply, I would do 6 times 3, and then I would divide by 2, or solve by dividing by 2. So 6 times 3 would give me 18, divided by 2 gives me 9. So it's going to cost me $9 for those 3 ringtones. And I know a lot of you had probably already in your head said, well, it's $3 per ringtone, and if I buy 3, that's going to be $9. And that's okay. But unfortunately, mental math for proportions isn't always going to be easy to do. Because sometimes, like I said, we're going to have some algebraic ones, so you have to understand the steps. So here's another way that you could set it up, is some kids will look at it and say, well, I'm going to do my ringtones in one proportion and my dollars in the other, because they read it like this. They say, well, 2 ringtones equals $6, so 3 ringtones would have to equal how many dollars? Same thing, you'll notice that I'm going to cross multiply 3 times 6, and then I'm going to divide by that third number of 2. 3 times 6 is 18, divided by 2 still gives me the $9. The key thing when working proportions is that you are matching labels in some sort. You're either matching labels, like here, we matched labels in the same fraction or proportion part. In our other one, we matched labels on the levels. So let me pull that one back out so that you can compare these two. Here we matched labels going on the level. So like my top was my ringtones and the bottom was my dollars. Okay, so it depends how you prefer, and it doesn't matter, your preference, just make sure that you're matching those up. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and practice some of these. So we're going to start out with some percentages. So here it says the test is worth 50 points, and your test score was a 60%. The test score, you got a test score of 60%. So your score, well, we don't know, but we know that the test was worth 50 points. So that was our total in our actual number of points. Our score was a 60%. And if I had all of the test, what percentage would that be? So the key thing you have to understand is anytime you're working with percent, you know the total, although it's not listed there. When we work proportions, you will always have 3 of the 4 boxes filled in. So here they didn't give us 3 of the 4 numbers. We had to infer and understand that the whole test was 100%. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and cross multiply and divide. And because we're multiplying and then dividing by a percent, we don't have to change those percents to decimals. So I would punch in 50 times 60 and then divide that by 100. And when I do that, it gives me 30 for my actual score. So when I went through to do this, I had it set up like this, 30, whoops, no, that one wasn't there. I had it set up as 60 over 100, and then here I knew the total of 50 points. Cross multiply is 300 divided, or 3,000 divided by 100 would give me 30. So I got 30 out of 50. Okay, so let's try another one. And this would be something like where you guys may come into, where you actually work with this as you get older and you're trying to determine when you get into those higher level classes in college, sometimes you have to figure out what percentage do I need to get a certain grade. Okay, because grade point average in college, if you're trying to get into some of those upper level classes, you're trying to be a doctor, you have to maintain a certain percentage to get into those higher end careers. So here it says a test is worth 150 points, and you got a test score of 96. So they want to know how many points I got out of the 150. So my total test points was 150. My percentage, my score or your score, was a 96%. And the total percent on test was 100. It's always going to be 100 for the total. So if I set it up using fractions, it would look like this. And then the actual test was 150 points. We're going to cross multiply and then solve or divide by 100. So 150 times 96, and then divide that by 100, or take the 2 zeros off. You got 144 points out of the 150. So my answer would be 144 points. Oops. Okay, so I want you guys to try this one. So the test was worth 50 points. You got a test score of 78%. So go ahead and pause your video and work your way through this one. You can either use the table or you can set it up as the ratio fraction format. You should have ended up with 39 points. So you got 39 out of 50 on that test. Okay, so that's just working with some percentages and understanding that percentages can also be set up as proportions, and realizing that when you have a percent, that's always out of 100%. Okay, so the next thing is sometimes they're going to give us story problems and ask us some questions. So this is a real world scenario. This happens all the time as you guys are working in family consumer sciences and you're maybe baking. You might want to increase a recipe or decrease a recipe just based on what you need. So here's our recipe. We have black bean soup, and that black bean soup requires 1.5 cups of black beans, a half cup of salsa, 2 cups of water, 1 tomato, and 2 teaspoons of seasoning. So it says a chef increases the amount of ingredients in a recipe to make a proportional recipe. The new recipe has 6 cups of black beans. Write a proportion that gives the number X of tomatoes in the new recipe. So we're going to set this up as our original recipe, and we're working with black beans and tomatoes in this scenario. So our black beans originally in the original recipe was 1.5 cups. And our tomatoes was, we needed 1 tomato. Okay, so our new recipe, he wants to make a recipe that requires 6 cups of black beans. So my black beans was my top number, so I'm going to put 6 cups here. And now I need to solve for this. So I'm going to, if I look at it as fractions, I'm going to cross multiply, divide, or solve. So if I cross multiply, 1 times 6 is 6, divided by 1.5 gives me 4. So I am going to need 4 tomatoes for this. Okay, so let's go ahead and try another one. We'll use the same recipe yet. So let's say instead of the amount of tomatoes I needed, I wanted to work off of the amount of water. So we'll use the same scenario in terms of we're still going to increase it to 6 cups of black beans. So write a proportion that gives the amount of water that you would need in the new recipe. So this time I need to pull my information for the water. So we're still using black beans, and our water was 2 cups. So the original recipe is 1.5 cups of black beans. And for my water, I needed 2 cups. Okay, in our new recipe, once again, we're gonna say that we're gonna use 6 cups of black beans. So black beans was on the top, so I'm gonna put that on the top. And now I need to solve for this missing part. So we're gonna cross multiply, divide, so 6 times 2 is 12. So 12 divided by 1.5 gives us 8. So I just found out that I need 8 cups of water. Okay, so that's using ratios and proportions in a real world situation. Okay, so now we're just gonna get lots of rep in for solving for proportions. So to solve for a missing proportion, what you're going to do is you're gonna work with multiplying. So cross multiplying and then solving or dividing by that third number. So here, we're gonna cross multiply where we have 2 numbers diagonal and then divide by the third number. So I'm gonna take 3 times 8 and then divide that by 2. 3 times 8 is 24, divided by 2 is going to give me 12. So I just found out that x equals 12. And of course, you may use a calculator. I'm not expecting you to do this longhand. On some of these will go ahead and write it out, just so that you're visually seeing what I'm doing to get my number. Okay, so let's try another one. Okay, so this time we've got our numbers. So the numbers that you're going to multiply are going to be the ones that are diagonal from each other. And the reason that this works out, and I'll prove this to you on this one, is because remember in our previous lesson, we went through and compared equivalent fractions and our cross products were equal to each other. So this is why this process of cross multiply divide works. So if I cross multiply, I would get 160. I need to find what number times 5 would give me the 160. So if I take 160 then divided by 5, it gives me 32. See, if I check 32 times 5, it's going to give me the 160. 32 times 5 gives me the 160. Okay, so I'm telling you that these are proportional, and then we're having to find that missing spot. Instead of doing multiply, well, because we don't know this D, the way that this is ultimately set up is it would kind of look like this. 8 times 20 is equal to 5 times D. And you guys are used to seeing it like that. Well, what would you guys do if I set it up algebraically? You would say, okay, 8 times 20 would give me the 160 equals 5D. And we'll have to use this concept when we get into our next lesson when we're working algebra. We'll have to write it out this way. So then I would divide by 5, divide by 5. So 160 divided by 5 would still give me that 32. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just practice writing it out algebraically so that we can practice that concept. It's going to help us with our next lesson. Okay, so here's our next one. And yes, we can use the calculator to help. So the numbers that we're going to write out, we've got 7 times 10 or 10 times 7 is going to be equal to 14 and Z, or 14 times Z. Okay, so then I end up with 70 equals 14Z. So we'll divide by 14. Divide by 14. So 70 divided by 14 is going to give me 5. So I just found out that Z equals 5. Okay, and I understand using this on the calculator, this right here, all of these steps, you're like, oh, that's extra steps. Do I really have to do that? We're going to practice it. The key thing is when we get into where we're solving algebraically, you have to see it that way so that you're understanding how to solve for X, because ultimately what's going to happen is they're going to take this Z and they're going to put another thing with it. They might put a 2Z there. And so then how do I figure out what 2z is? If you look at it in its format like this, you would understand how to then solve for z. Okay, right now we're doing that cross multiply divide, but as you get older, they're going to give you more and more complex numbers. So here, cross multiply these two. So 21 times 8 equals 24 times x. So 24x. Put these together. 21 times 8 gives me 168 equals 24x. And then I would divide by 24. So on my calculator, I'm just going to hit divide by 24. And that gives me x equals 7. So I just found out that this is 7. Okay, so I want you to understand that that's just working them out algebraically. Okay, so sometimes they're going to give us story problems. I'm going to shrink this down. And we just have to understand how to pull that information. So it says a school has 950 students. So this would be total students, boys and girls, right? Okay, the ratio of female to all students is 48 to 95. Write and solve a proportion to find the number F of female students. So we're working with females and total students. Okay, so our fraction that they gave us here, female to all students, this was the female, this was the all students. The order left to right, first to second is top to bottom. So my original rate was 48 to 95. And then my third bit of information was right here. There's 950 students total. So my total number was on the bottom. Okay, I can now cross multiply divide. Or somebody else might say, 95 times 10 would give me 950. 48 times 10 would give me 480 females. Okay, and you would get the same answer if you cross multiply divide. 95 times 48, divide that by, sorry, that should have been 950. Clear, 950 times 48, and then, 950 times 48, and then we're gonna divide that by 95. We still get the 480. Some people will just see the connection here, and it's not always easy to see, but sometimes it is. Okay, so that's just working with story problems. You have to understand that when they do that, they're giving you enough information. Just realize when they're giving you the stuff, the order that they're stated is the order that you have to write your ratio. So females to all students, since they had already set it up this way, females was first and all students was the second or the bottom number. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a couple to try on your own, just a basic proportions. So I want you to try this one. Let me erase this line. And I want you to try this one. Okay, working with decimals is not any different. So I want you to go ahead and solve for X and M. So you can pause your video, and yes, you may use calculators if you would like. Go ahead and pause your video and solve for X and M. So you should have ended up with, for the first one, X equals 4 and M equals 10. Key thing to remember on solving proportions, if you get word problems, make sure that you're matching labels, going in the order that it's stated. And then once you get them set up into their proportions, you're going to cross multiply where you have your two known numbers and then divide by the third. As we move on into this, we'll have to start setting them up as in this format. 1 times 6 is equal to 1.5 times x, because we will be solving where we've got some algebra on one of those levels. Good luck with this one, and just keep plugging away at it.